What's up, people? Back with another reaction, back with some more Phil Collins, and we're returning once again to the hits compilation. Thank you again to Michaela, as well as to Luca, who seemingly wants to come listen to Mr. Collins. And the next tune in the playlist is Both Sides of the Story. So yeah, it sounds like we might hear differing accounts, or at least have reference to two different ways to see the same series of events. Now, the use of the word both suggests it is two rather than three or four or some indeterminate number that is multiple. But yeah, of course, when it comes to relationships or personal interactions, even car accidents, there are often two sides to the story, and it depends on who you consult in terms of what the assessment is of what has transpired, why it happened, and what may happen next. So I wouldn't be surprised if this relates to some interpersonal scenario, be it a relationship, maybe a failed relationship. And again, I suppose because of In the Air Tonight, I can't help but always think of Phil's marriage, which I know, fell apart. I did a mini song documentary, thank you again to Michaela, about In the Air Tonight, and Phil talked about it, and he talked about how, in a way, it wasn't actually what I had heard about the song, and yet it was still perceived as such, certainly by his ex-wife, who was none too pleased. So again, maybe this could have something to do with a similar type of concept, even if it's not necessarily autobiographical. In any case, I will try to pick up what I can. This is Phil Collins. The song is Both Sides of the Story, and it's included in his hits compilation, which is indeed titled Hits.
Job, with a little respect, so he could get out while he can. We always need to hear both sides of the story. Both sides of the story. The neighborhood peace is shattered. It's the middle of the night. Young faces hide in the shadows while they watch them huddle and father fight. He says she's been unfaithful. She says her love for him is gone. And the brother shrugs to his sister and says, looks like it's just us from now on. All we always need to hear both sides of the story. We need to hear both sides of the story. And the lights are all on. The world is watching now. People looking for truth. We must not fail them now. Be sure before we close our eyes. Walk away from here. Do you hear both sides? No, 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 no. sides of the story. When the lights are all on, the world is watching now. People looking for truth, we must not fail them now. Be sure before we close our eyes. Walk away from here till you see both sides. No, 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 White man turns the corner, finds himself within a different world. Ghetto kid grabs his shoulder, throws him up against the wall. He says, would you respect me if I didn't have this gun? 'Cause without it, I don't get it, and that's why I carry one. We always need to hear both sides of the story. Both sides of the story. Oh, both sides of the story. Yes, both sides of the story. Oh, both sides of the story. 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 Must hear both sides of the story.
That is a really cool tune, and I have a lot to say about the lyrics, but before we get there, let me start with the sonics, in part because that outro really brought something I was going to mention to the fore, which is further to say it has this epic sound to it overall. Obviously, there's a very powerful percussive rhythm, like, there's a couple different arrangements of that or configurations of that, but overall the drum sonics were really popping on the tune, and I assume that is Phil himself playing. And there were those melodic lines which I think were probably keyboards, but really sounded like bagpipes, and there were like multiple lines which we heard right there at the end. So because of those, I think, bagpipe sounding, or like pipes sounding keyboard lines, in conjunction with the strong drum rhythms and the overall epic feel, it reminded me just a little bit of traditional pipes and drums, like Scottish music, which, I took a trip to Scotland and we went to a couple performances of that type of music, which I know is associated with marching and martial, cultural history. Nevertheless, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. It doesn't sound exactly like a pipes and drums marching group, but it had a bit of that sound because again, those, I think, keyboard lines really did sound like pipes. Nevertheless, I enjoy Phil's vocals, especially when he really burns a bit hotter with the lead vocal. I think those supporting vocals, which were kind of staggered with the lead vocal, I think those were also Phil. Let me know if I'm wrong about that. But yes, okay, so the lyrics. It definitely is playing off of the idea that any given situation, any given different interaction can be seen from different sides, can be seen from different angles and feelings and backgrounds, but it's more scenes, more interactions, more realities than I was thinking in advance. Okay, so we get at the beginning this image of a homeless guy who, has an empty bottle and is perhaps seen by some as indicative of, like the plague of homelessness, or the, what happens when you make bad choices or you have addictions and you end up on the street. And then we hear that, like, yeah, but it's someone who could really use an opportunity, someone just taking a chance on their humanity, and the idea that they still would like to be caring for themselves and a part of society and so on. And those are different ways to look at, is it a blight, is it an eyesore, or is it a human who could use some help? Is it a human who still has their humanity? And then we hear about a fighting couple, and on some level, okay, that fits with the idea of, like, the couple that has different views on what's happened. The guy is saying, oh, you cheated on me, and this is your fault. And she's saying, but I don't love you anymore. And so, what has happened is not me being a betrayer, but me just needing some outlet because there's nothing between us anymore. And then, by the way, at the same time, the children, the brother and the sister, they're observing this, and they have a different view on what this means and maybe what it will foretell for their life from here on out. And then we're talking about a white person turning down a corner, going into a different part of town, and suddenly it's like a foreign land, and a younger person of color, pushing them against the wall and saying, hey, I have this weapon, do you respect me because I have it? Because the reality is, for me, if I don't have this, I don't usually get respect. And that's why I carry one, which again, from some points of view, will be like, oh, it's indicative of crime in this part of town. And, it's, might play into their prejudices and bigotry about people who look different from themselves, who come from different ethno-linguistic backgrounds. But in reality, that might also speak to the reasons that people in that part of town feel they have to protect themselves, because they are vulnerable to the prejudices and the powers that be expressing and making decisions or actions based on those bigotries. And so it's looking at a number of different socio-cultural, interpersonal, and national realities and difficult circumstances from a variety of perspectives, and basically saying we need to hear it all. We need to hear both sides of the story. And in some cases, maybe no one is really wrong per se, but of course how you see it, how you see this situation, will depend on where you come from, what you've been taught, your attitudes about things, your prejudices, your bigotries, your understandings, and that will of course play into what you think should happen, your normative view. So yeah, I think it's a well-considered song. And maybe this isn't the place for this, but I was actually thinking, okay, so I did a watch-along about George Michael, and there was a brief moment where I think it's the lead singer of Oasis, Gallagher, is it Noel Gallagher? I'm forgetting the name. But they had a quick soundbite from him, and he was like exceedingly critical of George Michael in a way that I thought was unfair, and it was sort of like, dude, what's your problem? And I remember like being curious about this, so I looked him up. I think it was like Wikipedia, and I read that he has this kind of like feud with Phil Collins, and has said like really harsh things about Phil Collins. So I hear a song like this, I hear Phil sing like this, I hear him exploring different angles on the human condition like this, and again, my thought is like, Oasis dude, what is your problem? So again, that's a like really tangential, not relevant to the song here, or at least not directly, thought that I had when I was listening to this. But again, what's your problem, bro? In any case, a really cool tune from Phil. Thank you again to Michaela for this CD. Do let me know what you think, and she and I will see you next time. Peace.